Hi.
It's Crow's Nest time, episode 6. That's 3 plus 3. How you doing, Veeq?
It is. Yeah. I'm doing fine. We've been doing some stuff, like usual. I've been actually reading on some pathfinding stuff. I guess we want to elaborate on it later, but basically, there are some things that I learned about, basically some things that inspired me to try some new things for pathfinding in Antikythera to just, fine tune it, basically. And then there's also, we've seen Solstice, model stream recently, which was really epic. I know technically the model is not super, Protoss thematic, it doesn't have the curvatures, right?
We already fixed that. I fixed it afterwards.
Epic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really like to see the modeling process of that. Was really inspiring too. So, pretty cool.
Yeah, well, he said it on the stream himself, but Solstice has been working with the modeling software, like Blender specifically, for I think 5 years now, or close to 5 years. It's the only modeling.
I might be misremembering.
Yeah, whatever the amount of time it was, that's the only one he's worked with is Blender. So throughout many iterations and many changes to the software, he's kind of followed along, and he clearly knows his way around the program. Like I think about this myself too. If I go back and watch some of the very first model streams that I did, I have so much of it is just slow, and I'm like, I don't even know how to use the hotkeys or whatever, the keyboard shortcuts and stuff. And then you look at me now, and it's a lot faster, although there's still definitely more uncertainty, right? It's just I haven't mastered all of the tools yet, whereas he's clearly got a lot more of that down pat. So it's nice to see that, of course, and it was really cool just in general, kind of surreal to see somebody else have a stream title saying working on something related to CMBW, working on something related to our work, right? Because if you see your occasional engine streams, obviously my streams are much more common these days, and it's it's one of that's kind of normal, but I'm still not really used to spectating a stream of somebody else who's actively working on stuff related to our work. That's pretty new, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think the closest you had is when I streamed some development, but
yeah, and even then, you and I are talking a lot more often, and we're daily compatriots in that respect. And so it must have been funny to you actually got to watch it live. I watched it afterwards, but it must have been funny thinking oh, this guy's actually just working on a project I'm involved in, but he's doing it live, and it's kind of new to us. I imagine it's probably somewhat similar to if you're you release a game and then somebody streams not just playing the game, which is already kind of cool, but they stream editing something in the level editor if your game has one of those or something like that. They stream modding your game. That's kind of neat. It's not something you see every day. In this case, obviously he's actually giving back to the project proper, but it's kind of similar. I think you could probably draw some comparisons. So that'll be really surreal when the first time we see people release custom campaigns for our games. Can you imagine?
Yeah. Has been pretty cool to see someone not on the team work on the thing. Although, I don't know, maybe he should be on the team at some point.
You never know, man. Obviously, the only limiting factor is fucking money, dude. We need that. We need those threes, dude, to fund Solstice's career as a CMBW modeler. So if you like threes and you got too many of them, you can send them to him. Send them to us. You know how it works.
Yeah, pretty epic. So a lot of coffee.
Yeah, I am contractually obligated to say that there's actually, Solstice is not making money off of the threes. It's just for Veeq and myself right now. But you never know, man. Depending on how big that crowdfunding gets, it could become crowfunding.
Yeah,
pretty cool stuff. I definitely am a big fan of
fellow crows.
Yeah, of course. I'm a big fan of. I'm just a big fan of the fact that, today, for example, the reason why we can record this very Crow's Nest episode in this moment is actually because I don't have to be at work right now. Normally, you rewind about a week ago, I'm already at work. I'm clocked in and doing the daily slog. Or it's not even daily for me. I'm part-time. But, doing that. Now, I get to reduce my hours. I get to start later. And it's because, in no small part, that's the correct phrase. In no small part, due to the fact that we have that extra bit of time to us because we freed up some money due to the crowdfunding. So shout outs to those guys again. We didn't receive any very lengthy questions or anything this time around. No questions from Rob or anybody else associated with it. But I suppose we might as well throw this in here because we're talking about outreach. We did
Yeah.
get an email from Matthew, also known as Pr0nogo, I think is how you would pronounce his username. He has apparently made a game called Rerun, which I will try to remember to link in the description for. It's like
it's currently a free demo on Steam from what I was seeing.
Yes, yeah. I haven't checked it out because I'm a busy guy, but I checked out the Steam page at least because that's just a link. And in his email,
I was thinking I would
about,
probably stream it at some point. So.
Yeah, sure.
We'll give it a try.
Maybe there will be something interesting there. Of course, like, you know, can't. What was the? There was like a terminology where Jonathan Below linked some source code for some game that came out, and he was like, "Source code of this game is out. I haven't checked it out, so I can neither condone nor condemn." That was I thought that term of phrase was good. So I can neither condone nor condemn the game because I haven't checked it out really. But the interesting thing that looked like he said that the reason why he was emailing us about it is because Onatar's progression system was reminding him of the fact that he made this change to his own game or like part of the game system is that you apparently level up and you change your tech tree or whatever. Like it's not really an RTS, right? It's like a RPG of some kind, turn-based RPG, I think. And
yeah, it's like an exploration of like
right.
I don't know if it's a skill tree or something. I have only skimmed through the page, but it looked pretty interesting. So
yeah, the idea was that the levels you play in actually dictate the rewards you get or the changes that you make to your character. That's what I took from it. And that's very similar actually to Onatar, funnily enough. So it's kind of neat that somebody else out there has actually worked with this kind of concept. Because obviously it's ours is going to be an overworld map, right? So it's a bit different. But each zone that you travel to has the potential for you to customize your army if you claim victory over that zone. You can then use that in order to you pick a pretense, and that changes part of your army and stuff. So that's actually it's surprisingly maps very well on to the concept that I took away from Rerun anyway. So that'll be interesting to see if you do end up streaming it, Veeq, and then I suppose I'll make a community post or whatever saying that we did. But yeah, so cool, and that's the benefit, right? You guys remember we talked about that Byte Links game, which we never ended up checking out really, but we did, but
we did, yeah. It's just, like this one, I just looked at it and it was immediately more promising than that one that I actually played. So.
Yeah, so
they did not do a good job, honestly.
The problem with those guys is it was like playing a StarCraft custom campaign. That's all I can say, man. There's no voice acting.
It was weird.
How can you have no voice?
So clunky. How can you have an RTS without the units?
Well, maybe the concept could work. I didn't get past the menu, so I can't. I also can't condone or condemn that one, but
maybe. But like, it's weird because like, I wouldn't try to experiment with wild ideas if you can't even get a reasonable level of execution. Because if you can't do like a basic RTS well, then why would you try to redefine the genre if you don't have the tools for that? Like, they didn't even voice over their stuff. They didn't really. Like, I felt like the game was just not finished, basically.
It did seem a little bit like it was still in production based on what I saw. But also, I think I played it before it actually launched, so I actually don't know if that was the release version. But anyway, I think it's fine to experiment.
To it without voice acting, so okay. I don't think they just...
Yeah, I don't think they just didn't upload that part or whatever. I think it's fine to experiment, but yeah, like you're saying, the execution matters a lot. That's actually one of the things that has, it's really funny. This actually segues directly into one of the points I wanted to talk about here, which is there's this idea that we've started to adopt, I guess, and generally it's been a while that we've been thinking about this way. For a while ago, Veeq and I were talking about like resource areas for AI. We needed to figure out like some solution, and then Veeq realized if I just do the lame, shitty solutions that I can currently immediately do, that still gives me the room to then iterate and improve on them. It's like another way of reaffirming this idea that it's better to just start doing something, and then eventually it'll shape up into whatever you need it to shape up into, and I've started to apply that more verbally and consciously to actual content. It's better to just have something that you can play and something that you can experience. And that's actually what CMBW is in many ways. It's our, big conversion for StarCraft 1, but it also is a prototype of what we're going to be turning the RTS genre into, our kind of RTS, right? And that's our example of like, yeah, maybe we don't have a high level of execution, right? Because we don't have like a complete art pass done for all the units, and we don't have, a lot of unit responses still need to be recorded, but also a lot of them are just me. So we don't have the most, perfect like audio reads and stuff. We don't have the like a crazy variety necessarily of audio as well, because a lot of the voice acting is just me. And, all of this stuff is true. And we don't even have content really. Like we have a 4-mission campaign by Knight of the Realm, which is fairly solid, but we don't have any other like longer content. We don't have anything that's a conventional like introductory campaign yet, because none of that stuff has been done. And a lot of our maps are still like early draft or whatever. But all that is like all of these asterisks that you add on, it's still playable, right? You can still actually launch the game. You can experience what we've got, and you can say, oh, there's some interesting ideas here. And maybe, the execution can be improved over time or whatever. And that's the important thing, right? So, we were talking about byte links, and it's like the reason I brought them up, by the way, is because apparently if you just email us about your game, we'll talk about your game. That seems to be the trend. Those are there are 2 for 2 so far, at least as far as I can remember. Anyway, aside from that, though, we talked about byte links. We weren't super happy with like the end result. Okay, whatever. We move on. Like we would have talked about it in more depth if we actually liked it, right? And but at the same time, the people who made byte links can now iterate on their concept, and then they can maybe do a better job of executing in the future. Like they released a game, so it's a bit different.
Yeah, it might be true.
Like in theory, they can improve, right? So that's the kind of thing that's like, okay, you've got your first game under your belt. Like, nobody can really say that their first anything was particularly stellar. So, our idea.
Yeah, I was actually.
Go ahead.
I was actually thinking about what you said now, and it was actually reminding me of how I was doing like mini maps recently for CMBW, and like So I definitely started trying like more standard layouts to actually like hone in my skills. But what I'm actually what I was conscious of is like initially when I made Proxima, I was actually very I tried to make the layout work a lot, and I was editing it a lot, and it was to a point where like Mask didn't even know which version he played on, like how many versions there were or whatever, and it was very confusing. So, and I actually then made more maps. I just decided to get it done, right? And I just feel like Repulsion, for example, is way better than, for example, Equilibrium or Iceberg. I actually feel like Proxima is decent, although it could be better. And then I made the 2v2 map, and I'm probably gonna do some other team game maps. I did the Wild Whirlwind, right? It feels like just making a new map makes you... this could be applied in general, but like making a new map makes you learn more things than if you were just to continue iterating the old one. And then I actually talked to you in the DM about that one point. Is this thing that like, if you improve your skills, then if you come back to something old, you can improve it very easily. Like I gave you an example of how in GPTP, like I wrote some code 2 years later, I wasn't sure how to write it. And then like I came back to it recently, and I was like, I will rewrite this to this way because it's the most performant, most elegant, most usable way. And like it's simpler.
Well, yeah, like
the fucking C++.
The glib way to describe this is just to say that like if you just like, I mean, you're talking about it in a much more constructive way, and maybe this is a little bit more of like a self-sabotage way, but I kind of think about it like, if you aren't cringing at your work from like 2 years ago, then maybe there's a problem. Like maybe you're stagnating to some degree. But like some things are obviously going to be a bit different than that. But I always think about it like, if I look back at some of my old maps and I think, what the hell was I thinking? Then that's actually a good thing, because that means that I've actually improved a lot, right? It's not like, what the hell was I thinking? I'm so bad, and I still don't have an idea of what was bad about it. Like I actually know, I can observe it and say like, oh yeah, there's these faults, these flaws or whatever. And maybe that's an exaggerated way to look at it anyway. I don't really actually cringe at my old work necessarily. If it's very old, maybe like if I think about it in Consummate or whatever. Yeah. But the idea of like, a melee map I made a year ago, like it doesn't actually cause me physical pain to look at it. It's just like, okay, well I can see the through line of like, this is all the stuff that I've learned, right? And you're right, absolutely, that making a new map 100% gives you more stock, more experiences to actually do something. And so you can extrapolate that out, making a new, just making a campaign and not worrying about it, agonizing over the details and editing it over and over again, making a new game, right? When we release our first game, we're going to learn a lot of things. Maybe there's going to be some issues. Maybe there's going to be some things that need to be resolved in our workflow or our thought process and how we actually conceptualize the changes and stuff. But you think about it more in the sign of now these are things that we can use to inform the process, and then we can turn that process loose on a new game instead of worrying about, building out the continuously editing the previous game or whatever, right? There's a time and place for the iteration, and I feel like that is broadly speaking, that's during the actual process of creating it. And then when it's done, right? That's actually what it means to be done. And that doesn't mean we're never going to patch anything necessarily, but it's more like we want to make sure that what we're doing is not I have this fundamental idea that, we were talking about finishing your game, I think in the second episode of this series. And when we talked about that, we were talking about how the multiplayer, we should try to make it feature complete and finished when we're done with it, when we release the game initially. Yes, there's going to be some balance changes almost certainly, but those balance changes should be on the order of plus 5 HP or plus 1 damage or something minor, as opposed to a total rework and statistical revision or what have you of whatever thing, or an addition, like a new unit or something crazy. I don't think we need that sort of thing. I think what we need is let's just do our best to make it functional and workable. And since it's actually easier for us than the conventional RTS crowd, because our single player experience is actually closely mirrored by our multiplayer experience. And so we actually won't have too many crazy changes, hopefully, between those two experiences in terms of the game state. And as a result, we'll be vetting our game state, our multiplayer state in single player as well. And it'll give us more data. Yeah, it'll be somewhat flawed data. The AI obviously doesn't play like a normal player, but it still gives you more experience. There's more data to draw upon. And I think that's going to be really useful for us. So just by virtue of actually trying to be competitive with the content we make, it's definitely going to be helpful in evaluating the game state itself. So I think that's a big deal.
That is definitely very useful. I was thinking about this because I was watching some Brood War stuff, Brood War content, original vanilla. And I was thinking about how the tech tree pacing is, or where it's way more it's more limited in what possibilities can happen. It's way more predictable, right? And I was comparing it to CMBW, where it's way more flexible. And I there's something good in the fact that you can predict what can happen instead of it being very wild. And I was sort of criticizing CMBW for that, but another thing that really why that is because Brood War is very established. It doesn't really matter that it's less complicated. Very much matters that the fact that Brood War is not changing anymore. It's established. It's way more. It's just not. The game state is not as volatile in terms of the changes, right? Because it won't randomly. The meta won't randomly shift as much, and
well, the meta is set
more predictable because of that.
Decades of play, so it's been out for so long, right?
So
that's the biggest thing for sure. And also when you look at the tech tree pacing, I would actually argue it's non-existent in Brood War. You hit tier 3 in 8 minutes. So their version of tier 3 is super condensed, right? Yes, you can predict the path usually in matchups, it's pretty quick to actually achieve that. And then at that point, it's all about upgrades and it's all about researches and stuff, as opposed to
it's sort of you explore everything every game, at least as Terran, for example, because you sort of need everything to have have science facility, for example. You need to build almost every building you have, and it's not you just deliberately leave some paths of the tech tree unexplored as an expression of personality.
There's some cases,
CMBW
but it's
sort of has that, although not as it happens because you have so many choices, but you still chunk the the tech enables, right? You get tier 1, you can build anything in tier 1 immediately. So there are definitely differences between the models, and CMBW is definitely better because it has more stuff and it's just more interesting because of that, more deep.
Yeah, I mean, there's still the problem of trying to make sure that you can understand what your opponent is going to do. But I think as people build a better understanding of how many resources somebody actually can harvest in a certain amount of time, and therefore can build this mental model of like, if they have, say, 3 Goliaths early, that's 600 minerals and 150 gas. That's a lot of money. Okay, they must have they probably don't have an expansion then because they delayed it so long, right? Or something to that effect.
Yeah.
Like they haven't changed much more than scouting just the 3 Goliaths is huge for your understanding and estimation of what they can have. And a lot of people don't know that yet. And some of it is due to the fact that the stats keep changing and the costs keep changing and stuff. That's going to contribute. But another part is none of us are particularly great players. And on top of it, we have this situation where, you'll just easily start to see situations arise where as people get better at the game and as people develop a better understanding of the game, you're going to see more opportunities for people to actually make reads and use that opportunity. Something that happens commonly is you attack and put your opponent on the back foot. You should try to do something with that timing and that tempo advantage you have now. Now you should try to expand, maybe take a hidden base. Now you should try to, consolidate your advantage by rebuilding military or something. There's always something that you do at that point. A lot of players don't do that yet. In the castover I recently released as of the day of recording this on the 20th of March, by the way. I did the castover, and in the castover, Ben Taberski, classic guy, love that dude. He also recently, I think he's the most recent guy to sign up for the coffee page. So love him for multiple reasons, especially since I get to have coffee. But no, he's also a mapper for CMBW. He does maps and stuff. So anyway, he was fighting the Shambler, another classic guy. And he had this big attack that set the Shambler on the back foot, but then he didn't expand behind it, and he didn't rebuild his army quickly enough, and then eventually the counterattack killed him. And it was he had so much tempo, but he didn't actualize it, right? And so there's going to be a lot of cases, I think, where people just get better at that. I hope
I also suspect that a lot of people will sort of overthink the attack and will focus on rock, paper, scissoring your way through the game. I need the perfect solution for this problem. Instead of actually executing well, just stick to some units and try to adapt a bit, but also try to actually play the game with macro and micro and just actually on the mechanical level to not slip up, because the choices are not everything. They're definitely very big thing, but then I feel like Kian, for example, will do this a lot, where he will just blame the units for him losing and not the mechanics, where he thought that, this unit is just busted because it countered me so heavily or whatever, but he just had less stuff, for example, right?
A lot of his money was actually in the bank instead of in the unit, or in the queue instead of on the field or something like that. That can definitely happen too. A lot of that is the fundamental micro macro stuff where you can drill it, and we've seen improvement. And actually, one of the things I really hope that happens is as we keep building these RTS games and experiences, that the same people, the Shambler has been around for a long time now in the PvP scene, right? And Kian even longer, way longer, has been around when we were mostly fighting against AI and stuff. And the growth that we've seen from these players, both in their understanding of the game state, but also their actual RTS core experiences and their mechanics and stuff, is actually quite noticeable if you go back and watch some of the old castovers, or you go back and watch the old game nights.
As a community, I think.
And I think dragging them along, basically, and saying, hey, come on, we're going to the next game now, and this is going to be a different experience, but it's still going to train you to be a good RTS player. That's going to be really rewarding. I'm not saying we're all going to go pro when we release, Cosmonic Retail and stuff, but the idea of seeing that growth and seeing people go from fucking, whatever level they're at now to being able to actually manage multiple bases at the same time and all this other crazy stuff that we want to do with the high scale is going to be really nice, right?
I actually played Threshold recently with Chandler, and we actually desynced, so it was funny because we just basically had two separate instances of the game. But the gist of what I was experiencing is that I felt the improvement since I initially played Threshold, because I was able to actually manage 3 races, actually. And I was able to manage half of the map and be able to pretty effortlessly kill the enemy, actually explore my tech options and stuff. And I remember when I was playing it initially, I had way more troubles with that, and I was also abusing some of the fucking unit compositions like Antikythera
Oh,
at the time was really strong.
Yeah.
It was before even we had the big cast revisions and stuff.
Right,
so-
that was a long time ago. I remember actually watching you do that, and I was like, I can't believe you had to cheat to win or something. Which that's a classic one right there, a deep cut. No, yeah, I think when we're thinking about like the improvement as a community, it's definitely a big deal. I mean, something that you were saying too earlier struck a chord with me because I was thinking about how you want to keep your forces in check, like use what you have instead of necessarily worrying too much about the compositional choices. Like, what do you have right now, and what can you easily add on to your composition? And that what will that will hopefully give you like enough of an edge to offset whatever potential compositional counters could be at play. And ideally, everything in CMBW is a soft counter. Of course, there's going to be some cases where that's not technically true. Like, obviously, units which can't attack air will get, you could describe that as a hard counter. But for the most part, it's like compositions. Hopefully, there aren't really any compositions which hard counter other compositions, right? That's the goal that we would get to, is like individual unit interactions or whatever. But the idea, the richness of the game lies within how many different kinds of units you can make work together through elegant micro and obviously the macro necessary to even get to that point where you have all those units. And there's this concept that I remember first hearing about in League of Legends where you would do this thing called limit testing, which is when you deliberately get yourself into maybe bad decisions or situations, and then you see how, what are your limits, right? Mechanistically speaking, can you like micro your way out, right? Can you like mechanically speaking evacuate from such a situation and
because
survive, right?
The outcome of the decision is really like it's really it's determined by your execution. Like some decision might be dumb if your execution is bad, but if you're actually like Faker from League of Legends, you can probably take decisions that no other player could do and
in his prime, especially that was something that happened all the time. Yeah, or what seemingly unwinnable situations become winnable for people who are not mere mortals, right? That's the idea. Yeah. And so the limit testing could be applied to the RTS idea because now, okay, I'm technically not favored. Like, say I've got bio against Izira cores and I'm getting blown up or something. Like, okay, well, I probably should switch out to at least some mech support. But is there something within the bio
just add on few
that I can do?
Few siege tanks and that's it.
Yeah. In this particular,
or maybe Cyprians. I don't know. Like,
you
could do something like that.
Yeah, like the idea is like, what are actually the limits? And then that also helps with like balance evaluation, right? Like maybe you are like Kian and you feel like something is really busted. But if you just keep limit testing, okay, like maybe that composition doesn't work. Maybe that is a point of consternation. Maybe that should be changed. But also, like maybe it's something where that's just the way it is. Like maybe, obviously, like with bunkers, bio seem to be impenetrable, but that's its own thing, right? And so like, how do I maybe try to be more aggressive? Okay, now I can suddenly start to think about dropping because I am spending less gas and that affords me the drops and stuff. And I don't know. There's like all these other things that you can do.
Balance is also just a bit of a misnomer, I'd say, because like the whole point is that you will have things that are stronger and weaker. Like maybe a zero core is just this unit that allows Zerg not to dominate that time of the game, and then they like fall off or something. And maybe that's the dynamic. You're just like the macro, like holistically, you wouldn't want one race to win way more than other races, obviously. But like in Brood War, that was actually very like you could actually observe it. Like you can't directly fight mech, for example. It's really strong, right? Yeah. Like, but it also has this weakness where it can't really take new bases as easily as like mobile compositions. So
yeah, the wider you spread your attack or your defense force in this case out, like the more chinks there are in the armor, right? Because of the fact that you're sort of split apart and spread out, and like now you're only as strong as your weakest link, and you're super immobile and etc.
Yeah. And then there are also some compositions that just win you the game when you have them, and the whole thing about them is that you must not allow your like enemy to have them, because like, basically it works this way. They make themselves very vulnerable for some like time period, and if you can't breach the link, they just get this composition that you can fight against. Like you could imagine like a late game mech or like carrier Maz or whatever, right? Like if they're fully upgraded in Brood War and you allowed it to happen, you didn't apply enough pressure, you were slacking off, then this is just how the game works, right? Like it's not necessarily that unit is broken, it's more that you probably did something wrong to allow it to happen. Maybe it's a bit binary, arguably.
Right. I would like it to not ever be in a situation where you lose because you like your opponent messed up stuff. But also, if they have been able to mess up stuff, that is something where it feels like maybe you were slacking off, like you were saying. So I don't really know how to fall down on that.
It depends how easy it is to turtle.
Yes,
because if they actually took most of the bases on the map and they hit a critical mass of some unit that they had to invest a lot into, then that's probably fine. But if they like were on 2 bases or something turtling, and you just have no answer outside of breaking the turtle, that would feel shitty. But you usually do, because you can just like eco up, macro up. So.
Well, I'll keep that in mind, and I'll just save that and replay that when I next use ion cannons against you. So yeah, I mean, I think all in all, like some of the takeaways, I guess, from this topic have been like it's really interesting to see the evolution of players individually and their skill. Like even though Meska is very hard on himself, for example, he's somebody who's absolutely improved his game knowledge over time. Yes, there's still some things that like surprise him when he finds them out or whatever, but. Being able to understand stuff like that is, that's just a learning experience, right? And also doesn't help that we keep changing the maps in the game on them, but whatever. And then also, the idea that like we can continue to iterate on this stuff. Like, I don't know. It's kind of interesting. It's like you get this situation where there's this unification of like what actually works, and when you think about it like this, like I'll present it to you like this, right? We've got this idea. The original topic was, isn't it better to just have something and then iterate on it and decide if it's worth, continuing to work on, or do we just go make the next thing, which is like you were talking about, make a new map instead of continuing to iterate an old map and stuff. But I actually kind of feel like it's the same thing with people playing the game and trying to get better as players, right? It's like, let me just get like a baseline strategy down. And this is what I like to do. This is what I gravitate towards because this is my personality or whatever. I like to drop a lot, or I like to do whatever. I like to do this. I like to expand a lot. I like to turtle a lot, whatever the case may be. So start with that. Like that's your basic idea of a strategy. Then just iterate on it. See what works. Do this limit testing exercise. Keep doing this stuff. Like see what you can do. It's very similar, right? It's like it's a kind of the same thing. It's almost as if this is like a true thing about life in general. Is that one of the ways that you can improve stuff is just by adopting this, like, come up with a hypothesis, I guess, test the hypothesis, and then if it works, then great, and if it doesn't, discard it, get a new one. That's the kind of idea that I'm getting.
That's a good process. But I would generally like recommend to not play, like if you're playing to learn, you probably want to stick to one race and one strat for at least like few games in a row. Because if you don't do that, it's like, oh, I play Terran, I will play a bio build. And then the next game, oh, I play Protoss, I will build like, I'll fucking turtle. Yeah. And now I play Zerg and I will like take every base on the map. Like, you won't really learn from that because you will be sort of like, you're getting all the kind of signals where like you might not really realize what was the problem in each game because you don't observe enough patterns and you don't know what your weakness is, especially when you're doing like completely different strategies with completely different races, right? So I am myself a random main, but I am still trying to practice individual races recently because it's more productive that way.
Just getting a feel for the timings and stuff. The other thing that kind of conflicts with this is that we're still trying to figure out what a good baseline would be for resource availability in mains and stuff. And I also really like the idea that you would just have to adapt based on what the map is. But that's actually really difficult to do because a lot of the times you get it by feel. Like most people don't solve the like resource income rates or whatever mathematically and then use that to inform how much they can do. It's certainly not on the fly. Like if there's a case where there's actually less minerals in the main in say a Brood War ladder map, then that map is just, you know what the timings are based on that, right? Or if there's like a secondary gas that has 500 gas in it, and it's like a depleted geyser basically, but it allows you to get like upgrade your gas yield.
I've personally been feeling like in the early game you shouldn't be I don't know. I just felt like the early game is probably better off when it's standardized, and then the later you go into the game the more branches you get. Like I've like personally just felt like it's the best model for my maps. You might disagree, but basically it feels like it gives you a robust opening, but which can allow you to at least have an army, right? Mm-hmm. And then you can diverge. Like when you actually have some map control, you can make those meaningful decisions then.
Well, it's like
it might not be the only model, right?
You need to. What you're observing is that when you are starting off in the map, it would be really good if you could know exactly, like if you have some set of strategies that basically works on any map, or like an opener that basically works on any map, because you've figured out how much money you need, and so you get that money, and like a fast expand as Zerg or whatever, right? It's like if I go hatch first as Zerg, it's a lot better if I can do it. Like the more 8 yields that I have in my base, that's the faster it is for me to fast expand, right? As like one example. And so like that will dramatically be different if I only have 8 yields instead of 4 8 yields, and 4 8 yields seems to be like a common baseline for a lot of maps. But sometimes maybe there's 5, or sometimes there's only 3, right? And so like that's a big deal. Maybe there's 7 nodes total instead of 8 or whatever. Like there's all sorts of different cases where it could be the case that some changes end up happening. But I also think that we will naturally sort of arrive at some sort of like community, like we've fast approached, I think, like 4 8 yields, 3 6 yields, and maybe a 4 yield or something occasionally. Like that seems to be the basic setup for a lot of maps now. I guess there's plenty of outliers, but like that seems to be the growing
also
thing.
Usually one geyser and one ridge, sometimes 2 geysers, sometimes 2 ridges or something. But
I think actually I don't even know if there has been a 2. I know there's been some naturals that have ridges only, but like I don't know. It's like it's interesting anyway. It's like there's some shit you can do. I don't know. I think it's nice to be able to be flexible, but there's probably also that case. Like that's the wild creative in me is like, let's make asymmetrical maps and let's just have whatever. But also you want some structure and some like consistency in the early availability of things, just for the sake of like, here's some idea of what's good. Like that's another thing too, is that like, DF made a map recently called Mame Street, which I love the name of. It's also quite a labyrinth. So if anybody decides to go play it, it's a trip. But the thing that was really interesting was that he decided to go for like a rough symmetry and like make divergences from the symmetry like in the corners or like in specific areas of the map or whatever. It's like an experiment. I think that's really interesting because it gives you this opportunity then to, again, like roughly, like maybe the main and the nat and the third are all symmetrical, right? And then there's some deviations between them. That could be one example, right? Like it doesn't have to be that the resource availability is different, but it could be that like if you spawn one out of, say there's 4 spawns, the first 2 spawns might have easy access to a gas-only base to give you more of the rich resource. And then the second ones maybe have more minerals. And so like depending on where you are, your optimal strategies change. And that's maybe a better way of exploring the idea of asymmetrical maps in general, because like it might not even be that you actually have a crazy amount of asymmetry. It's not like you're literally making the map from scratch on both sides and just seeing what flows, like a scenario or a campaign map, right? It might be that you start with the whatever symmetry you choose and you deviate from it at some determined point after you've set up what you actually want to be symmetrical.
Like Parabola actually does that, because it like I'm pretty sure like some things are just mostly visual, but I think the middle side bases also have geyser placed. The XY mirror.
Yes,
so like
it's not
the
not
right
a total,
one favors the top team and the left one favors the bottom team or something. With the position of the geyser.
It's a little bit of because most of the time it's just top bottom mirror, but there is a little bit of a deviation.
Yeah, you have a bit of XY, right?
Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
Stuff like that I think actually helps out quite a bit, because you just get this experience in general of looking through a map and saying like you have to evaluate your strategy and update it and adapt it based on your spawn or based on some other aspect. I think like maybe I'm overselling it and maybe it's not the future of map making, but I just feel like that is more interesting to me than always making sure that you have the one-to-one symmetrical stuff. We're kind of glossing over the fact that in most RTS games, it actually is impossible for symmetry to be real. Like even in StarCraft 2, some spawns are going to be good for Terran because they can build their add-on safely or as part of their wall. And other spawns are not going to be good for Terran because they can't do that. But in Brood War especially, it's like, I mean, our symmetry is really bad because we still don't have the source code for SEM Draft 2. And then on top of it, it's like, decide if you correct all the symmetry errors that pop up, you still are in a situation where like the top player is going to be slightly advantaged most of the time because the bottom player has the UI. Like if you're spawning on the bottom, you've got the UI blocking your way, and also like cliffs are 2 tiles tall when they're north facing
So
and
the
3 tiles
UI
tall when they're
thing
south
is
facing.
only for the minimap and the command card part, I'm pretty sure. It doesn't actually, like, the whole thing doesn't include the...
Yeah, it's only part of it, but it still
but it's, like, in
obscures, like,
corners is really bad.
I think it's at least 1 tile of missing data, maybe more. So it actually
No,
will
only on the
sometimes.
sides, though.
What I mean is you actually do have less data on the, like I noticed this in Terminus. When I was making Terminus, you actually have resources that are up against the, like, a cliff or whatever. And on one base, you could move the workers behind the minerals, and on another base, you couldn't. Or maybe it was that you could build a structure behind the minerals for one base, but you couldn't do it the other way. That's just like how the symmetry works out because of the way that it's all hooked up. So, and you also have to, like, give more space away from the bottom to avoid the UI blocking stuff versus the top, which you don't have that problem at all. So you have to, like, really adjust what you're doing if you're going to put resources near the edge.
I mean, the biggest problem in Brood War is that you have the cliff size differences, which sometimes makes you want to shift 1 tile down or 1 tile down up, like all the resources and the base, or do that. Sometimes you will have to shift it 1 tile up or down for it to make sense, and that creates another asymmetry. So.
Yeah. So it's this compounding thing that just continues to rear its ugly head in a few places.
Yeah.
So all of that is good stuff to avoid when we ever end up making some
is
stuff.
that everything outside of the Unreal project stuff?
Well, we were going to talk about I guess it's like, what do we want to explore in our first game? I don't know if you had anything in particular you wanted to say. Obviously, for whatever content we end up making for CMBW, we're mostly going to be prototyping the idea of, like, some of the ideas we have about AI that actually want to win, playing by somewhat fair rules within what is reasonable. Yeah. There's, like, a lot of concessions that we'll end up making because it's not our source code. It's not our, like, work environment. Like, our editor is not even something we can modify. And then let alone, like, there's certain limitations to what we can do with the AI in the game. Really making them adaptable is the hardest part. You can sort of fake it or, like, work around some issues, but a lot of it is down to, like, really arduous things that take a lot of time. And it's not really economical to do that. And so it's probably better to play it a little bit. Like, actually, Knight of the Realms campaign, Butcher's Ballad, which is 4 missions, like, he doesn't do a crazy amount of AI work. He doesn't do, like, some of the crazy shit that I do, where, like, if one of the AIs sees you in one of the maps for To Touch the Sun, if the AI sees a Wraith or a Star Pad, it will say, oh, I should build Watchdogs. And, like, that's, like, extra shit that I've put into the game, like, put into that AI specifically. It's like enabling these layouts that request the Watchdogs for anti-air defense. And it's like, if I have to do that for every single AI on every single map, it becomes a really big extra time sink. Whereas maybe I should just rely on, like, whatever the default is and not worry as much about stuff like that. Or maybe I can find some way to make it more generic or whatever. But so anyway, concessions aside and time sinks aside, like, there's lessons that we can still learn about making the content that can apply. I think probably the biggest one is, like, figuring out what a healthy balance is of dialogue. Something I've criticized about StarCraft 2 missions, for example, is that a lot of the time the dialogue is just there for one to, like, exposit shit or handhold the player and tell them not to attack the enemy base, because that's something that we do in an RTS apparently. And but most importantly, it's distracting you from the total absence of content and engagement. It's like, yeah, if we just add a lot of transmissions, then the player will be, like, busy thinking about those and not so busy thinking about what they're not really getting out of the experience. And if we instead actually have a worthwhile experience, like, how many transmissions do we actually want in the game, and to what degree should they ever be particularly long? Like, I think it's probably better if it's almost all of the events are, like, related to things that actually have like, reactions to the game, or they have like, if there's a state change somewhere where an AI is going to arrive mid-game or something, then, like, stuff that relates to that. And that way it's all grounded in what's actually happening in the gameplay. And you have much less in the form of, like, really flowery taunts back and forth that take, like, a bunch of transmissions and a bunch of individual lines of dialogue and stuff, right? So yeah, I don't know. I think all of that, being able to figure out an actual testable hypothesis of that through CMBW content would definitely be pretty neat, I think. And also, maybe prototyping the system that we had for making it so that when you play the game the first time, you get the full dialogue event of whatever you haven't seen so far. But on future plays, like, say you lose and you have to restart, you get a truncated version of the intro because you already heard the full intro. So now you get the short version, right?
Maybe the way we do that is just when you boot the mission from the game menu, it would always do the long thing because we would assume the player has just run the game. So maybe he played the mission yesterday, so he would want to hear the dialogue again.
Oh yeah, sure, I see what you're saying. But
And
if
then
you
if you
restart,
it would keep it short.
Yeah, that could work. Also, my plan was just to log when they've heard a dialogue event, and then allow you to reset that log, like the bank data or whatever. You could reset it for that mission or whatever.
I think that would be very clunky though. So.
Well, in Brood War especially, I don't know about it. What kind of solution we could do in Antikythera, but like the idea that I had behind that was mostly just so that players could control when they actually want to reset it. Because maybe you do want to get back into the mission, but you don't want to listen to the event again. But at that point, I guess you could just hit the escape key to skip it. So it's probably not that big of a deal. Either way, whatever we decide for the technical implementation of it, being able to prototype something like that in CMBW would be great, because that's another like hypothesis I have that makes missions much more replayable. If we do decide to have a lengthy opener of some kind, not necessarily a cutscene mode kind of deal, but like just a, you're starting to order your initial units around and you're getting the lay of the land as like the final points of the briefing. Like I always had this funny joke when I was playing custom content, which is like there'd be this like 5-minute long briefing or whatever, and then I'd get in and I still wouldn't be able to play because the briefing has to continue, or like the game is still paused or whatever. It's like really silly. But maybe we are actually continuing the briefing just as like a final point of here's what we have.
I like the video that the artist has posted with with gamers being silly.
Yeah,
they want
Netflix,
to watch a
dude.
fucking
Netflix
with buttons. Yeah.
That's a good
It's
video.
really good.
Yeah, if you're a follower of Artosis, tell him to get on the No Frauds Club because we want to interview him. But put out that call to action. Yeah, I don't know. At this point, I've become a lot less shameless about asking people to do interviews now. It's like, bro, listen, we're gonna have a good conversation. You might not know who I am, but we're gonna have a good conversation. Just look at all of these Jonathan Blow interview episodes. We're gonna have a good conversation.
I think people have been happy. Like, right?
Oh yeah. I don't think
I don't think there was a single experience where they weren't happy after about doing the convo. So
I think the one with Cursed Farms, Ross Scott, he said that he would have preferred to talk about more wacky things or something, but that was the only thing that I got that would have been construed as negative feedback probably. Oh, he also didn't like the thumbnail I made. I don't know why. He didn't tell me much about that, but yeah. Anyway, that's it. But it was a good time. Yeah, I think we enjoyed like all of the times that I've had people on has been enjoyable. I definitely want to do more interviews. In fact, one of the things I was saying, I don't think I actually sent this email yet. Or maybe I did. But Pr0nogo, Matthew, who emailed us about his game, I was saying, like, hey, when your game is out, maybe you can, let us know. And, the subtext of that anyway would have been, if I actually like your game and I want to talk with you about some of the stuff you did, we could probably have you on for an interview, right? Like stuff like that could be interesting.
Yeah.
Maybe actually getting some more indie game developers on. Because really, if you can call them indie, I guess technically they are independent, right? But it's like, it's, Jonathan Blow, it's Reagan Burns, it's people who've already done a lot of established stuff. So getting some more, like if Byte Links had turned out to be really interesting, then I probably would have offered to ask one of them on. Even though like I don't know who these people are, right? They don't necessarily have web presence, but that's not important to me. It's more like, do you have interesting ideas? Or are we going to have an interesting conversation? So yeah, getting people on for that stuff is really neat. And definitely something that I think we need more of in general. And it's not for lack of trying, boys. I have been reaching out to people, just not getting the response yet. So we'll see how that goes.
Again, I think game dev people are very busy, but
yeah, usually.
I don't know about indie.
Well, you know what you guys can do? If you know people who you want to see interviewed, all you have to do is just tell them about the channel and then say, hey, these guys are pretty cool. And then, or, that sort of thing. So we'll see what happens. But yeah, that's pretty much it. But yeah, anyway, I guess like to rerun my point, being able to prototype some of our ideas for single player content and like how all those systems work in CMBW would be good. But that's like exploring what we already kind of want to explore anyway. Is there something specific that you want to explore either in this game that we're working on or in Onatar or whatever? Like, I guess the biggest thing would probably be scale, but is there anything in particular you wanted to talk about from the subject of exploring stuff?
I'm curious about doing a few things. Like, I'm just curious exploring like some new stuff, like either like new concepts that we weren't able to program or just like systemic revisions. Like I was talking to you about the tech pacing where it could be like what we could try else, right? And a few other things.
Yeah, I think we've already put a lot of those
that I had, and
Yeah. A lot of
It's
the
just like I'm
ideas.
curious how those would like work out in practice, right?
Mhm. I think a lot of the ideas you
Like the
also
system.
put forth in some way, shape, or form are turning up in the game that we're working on now anyway. So,
Yeah.
like obviously they're filtered through whatever I think how to apply it to like the themes of the races and stuff, right? That's a big thing is actually, I feel like StarCraft always has had this thing where, like Brood War specifically, where the races feel very much different than each other. I always felt that in StarCraft 2, for example, Terrans having the reactor to get the simultaneous Q actually made it feel like it kind of blurred the line of what they were supposed to do. Because a lot of the time they would have a lot of cheap units that were trash units for the most part. You just needed to mass up for. And that's sort of what the identity of Zerg units are. So I felt like that was an
I did
example of them
actually
blurring it.
point that out recently that I feel like Protoss in CMBW probably shouldn't have to per requisition at all and should just instead have something else where maybe the production structure is cheap so you can spam it more, or maybe the time cost is lowered so you can express it like that. But I don't know what your thoughts were on that. I don't remember.
Oh, well, in this specific case, I mean, the biggest issue is that, like, the units which are 2 per rec are not very, like, I guess maybe you can make the argument that they don't feel super Protossy, but I actually don't know if that's true. Like, the Vassal and the Simulacrum are
I
both
feel
pretty
strong
neat
about
units.
them. It's just like weird that there's just so many things that are to per rec now, and some
There's 3
already
units for
prototyped.
Protoss.
Yeah,
That's not
but
so many.
still,
That's 3, dude.
it's more than. Isn't it more than what Zerg has?
No.
They
Zerg
have
has like
Zephyr
5.
Core and
Zethar
I'm not
Sycrolisk,
counting the
Sovraleth,
motors.
Nathracor. Yeah, that's 4 at least. And then obviously
Yeah.
everything from the Gathalask is like the whole thing. So it's the
Yeah.
whole race. I think it might be one other, I think. I can't remember. I think I planned the Excitralist to be 2 per rec, but it's not implemented again yet. Anyway, I do think that it would be nice if we could consolidate that. The problem is that, like, in the Vassal case, if you make it more singular, then obviously you have to make it more individually powerful. But you also, like, the passive is about it dying, which is better if
Yeah,
you
I was
can
not thinking
have
you
many
would
of
want
them.
to reduce the count. Like you wouldn't want to net reduce the count. This is like I was thinking the way you achieve the count is a bit different from Zerg.
Well,
Because
it
there's a lot
becomes
of
an
overlap.
APM tax comparatively, right? Because now you have to train the button more and more. Like if we just cut the time cost in half and the mineral cost in half for the Vassal.
Oh, what
as
you
an
can do
example.
is make lattice cost half the but you would have to like
Yeah, that has a lot of balance implications, dude. Manifolds are already really strong.
yeah, you'd have to like either move them somewhere or double their time cost or something weird. But I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we can evaluate that idea. Like maybe I can find some way to fit it in. The only like really the 2 units that from the lattice are the big ones. Like the Servitor is pretty new as an addition and can be rejigged.
What
at
was
some
the
point anyway.
servitor?
That's the shoe, dude.
It's the shoe.
Shoevitor.
Yeah.
I don't know why it's a shoe. It doesn't really look like a shoe to me, but Mesk thinks it does. But he also thinks that anything that's vaguely long is a penis. So he's got some interesting ideas. Yeah, he does like feet. He's a big fan of feet. Every time he sees feet, he has a little.
I should just remodel Starpad so it has feet.
It needs feet, and it has to lift off, dude. Yeah. We got to figure out if Solstice can add some Terran. If he can match the Terran like mech / building material stuff. If we can match that for the star pad, we can actually put that in the game finally. It's been you modeled it, I feel like a year ago or something. Maybe it was not that long ago, but
I was thinking that I could actually try to remodel it.
Yeah, if you want to do it from scratch, he can definitely help with the color, like the compositing and stuff, right? So,
yeah.
He'll be invaluable in that. So definitely pretty big.
Really,
here is a funny English anecdote, Veeq. I don't understand why the word invaluable means really valuable, because you would think that in as a prefix would negate it, but actually it makes it more valuable. It's actually like paramount.
I know what that is. I was thinking about it. It's the same in Polish actually. It's because it's so valuable that you can't name a price tag on it. That's basically the idea behind it.
I see. Incalculable value is what you would say. Incalculable.
Yeah, sort of.
Interesting. Yeah. I just thought that was funny because as a kid, I was always like, does that mean it's useless? And like, no, actually, it's the opposite. Like when I first heard the word.
I had the same thoughts, but in Polish, obviously.
You can't think in Polish, dude. All you just think about is fucking
Can.
a mountaintop with Patrick on it. You're like, what the hell? Why is he here? All right, then nobody's gonna get that
Crazy
reference, but that's
mountain.
fine.
Well, anyways, let's talk about the Unreal stuff you've been doing because I think we are running out of time, right?
Yeah, we got a little bit of time. I can talk about that, I guess.
That's
So I've been working very slowly because obviously we're working on a bunch of other stuff. I'm juggling an Unreal Engine project, and it is going to be a turn-based game. So originally, our code word for it, as my brother and I were the ones who were working on it. My code name for it, of course, was Dogvinity, because if you know anything about us, we played Divinity, I think it's Original Sin is the name of the subtitle.
Yeah.
We played the first two, like those two games, right? Those are somewhat recent, like in the last decade, they came out, and they are. The second game did some interesting and much needed improvements, like the whole magic system and like the magic armor and stuff like that. I thought was neat. Obviously, in practice, it led you to want to like specialize into just breaking all of one thing. Like, I don't know, like in practice, it didn't really work out, I don't think, for the conventional playthrough. I know those games actually have like cult followings or whatever.
It's interesting you have the reflection because I feel like most RPG games, like Dungeon and Dragons included, will have this thing where they like come up with something very elaborate, but actually when players try to min-max it, it actually becomes really uninteresting.
Yeah. Well, that's
that's
exactly what
very
happened in
common.
this case. I mean, it's not even an elaborate change. It's actually, it simplifies a lot of things because basically, like, abilities deal damage, but only apply status effects if you have no armor of the type that they do. So you could have like a physical damage bleed, for example, and if you don't pierce the physical armor, which is like a secondary life bar, then it won't actually proc the bleed. I think that's how it works. Maybe some things pierced it anyway, which is obviously silly exceptionism. But the idea for magic, for example, like you could stun somebody, but if they still have magic armor, then it won't stun. So you get some things which are kind of silly, like they don't do any magic damage, but they do stun. So you have to wait until they had no magic armor left. But the other thing you could do is like, you know, if you have this ice attack, then it will slow the enemy, like chill them, but only if it breaks their magic armor first. Stuff like that would happen all the time. So it actually was kind of elegant at the early levels, but of course leveling breaks everything and makes it silly. So at some point you had like enemies with 500 physical armor, and it's like, well, they only have 100 magic armor, so I guess I'm supposed to use magic to beat them. But it's, you know, it's just silly. Like I wasn't a big fan of that. Anyway, like scaling aside, it was an interesting improvement. It definitely was better than just like 20% chance to stun LOL or whatever. You know what I mean? Like it's just like that's obviously better. But yeah. So anyway, there was still some RNG in Divinity 2. Our game, Dogvinity, is the code name. That's why it was called Dogvinity. However, I actually think I'm going to call it Adversary, which is a very simple name, but I couldn't find any games named Adversary. Maybe there's some like abandonware stuff. It actually gives me retro like 90s adventure game vibes, like to think about like getting a game box back in the day. And then, you know, you're thinking about like, I mean, this is before the 90s, I guess, but it's like Return to Monkey Island or whatever, or Return to Skull Island, excuse me. Wow, I got my wires crossed there. Some of those older adventure games or whatever, or even like some of the classical, like, you know, Baldur's Gate type games or whatever. Just thinking of a game called Adversary makes me feel like that. And it gives me retro vibes. And maybe that's what I'm nostalgic for to some degree. But I think that's probably what I would end up calling it. And the game is about this idea that, like, yes, it's going to be a turn-based game. It's probably, you would describe it as a fantasy setting, although I don't shy away from stuff that's maybe a bit more technological. But a lot of it is, you know, like it's a completely original world.
Fantasy.
There you go. Yeah. Mechanical fantasy, bro. Which is not my porn name, I promise. The main idea behind it was I wanted a game where you would find some way to progress without leveling up. And you would obviously have no RNG, but you would still have some really interesting interactions with like abilities and stuff. I haven't exactly cracked the code for all the details, but one of the ideas that I had was that another thing that this game will have is an actual living world where things will occur, and like you might spawn in like near a front line of a war that's happening between big factions. And, you know, maybe if you decide to take your sweet time in the starting zone, it actually gets swept over by the other, like invaded, and maybe you choose to pick a side or you choose to not, and you just sort of like bunker down until the war finishes or whatever. And then when you come back up, it's under new management. Okay, well, time to see what's going on here, right? I think stuff like that could be kind of interesting. Again, I don't know how exactly it would all be handled. Like, it's a very complicated undertaking to do that particular part. But I like the idea of, you know, just like in real life, you can choose to interact with certain things and change them, or you can choose to leave them be and they will still interact, right? Like, it's not like as soon as you stop looking at your family, they stop operating like some kind of, wacky fucking simulation or anything, right? Because we do not live in a simulation, guys. Wink. But the idea behind it was like, here's actually a living, breathing world. Here's something that you can actually mess around with. Here's, you can be a part of like a big, nation wide or intranational or international even conflicts and stuff. Like, you can take part of that. All the while, the way that we would handle like skill progression and whatnot is you would actually be pledging yourself in service to various deities. And so my thinking was you would have a couple of deities that are like most common and most popular, right? Then you would have some deities that weren't as popular, but were still like, respected or known of, at least people knew of them, even if they didn't like worship them to the same fervor as some of the other ones. And then there would be some rare deities who were basically on death's door. Like, sort of, it's a common trope, I think, in fantasy, but deities losing power the less people believe in them, basically. I don't really know how you would get to that point, actually, in a conventional setting, because surely if you believe in something, or surely if something requires you to believe in it, it would just manifest in front of you. Like, I don't know why they think that. Like, that was something in the Supernatural TV series, I think. But anyway, regardless, it's like, okay, that's kind of one of the ideas that we have. So, you would imagine the deities themselves would be involved in the human politics, because like the humans and other races worshiping them is actually a big deal for like their ability to be, continue to stay in power and stuff. Which means if there's like dying gods, like a cornered animal, they're going to be very dangerous. They're going to do very wacky things. And if you so desire to seek them out, they might promise you crazy amounts of power in exchange for you spreading their gospel, so to speak. So you can imagine that would be very different. And anyway, all of these gods have different domains. They give you different unlocks. So you'd have access to different skills and different, talents and traits or whatever. And that would be your main source of progression. You would undergo these various trials, which would have various elements of difficulty to them. And some of them would also not even be available. Like the god of war is like a basic god for you being a soldier, right? But if you want to go super deep into the God of War talent tree, if you want to call it that, you want to progress super deep in that, then what you would end up with a lot of the time is you have to go seek out like, barbarians that have been shunned from polite society, right? Because that's where they would go, obviously. Like, this is one of the places you might find the most devout to the God of War. So anyway, there's stuff like that. And I've started to piece together.
How does it work? Does that actually mean that the more you go into a skill tree path, the more you actually have to like explore some like areas of the world, or is that not what I'm getting at?
Yeah, that would be one way to do it, right? You explore the area of the world that actually has elements of that. But it also means
Like
that if you're going to play in co-op, then you have to figure out how to balance that out, right? And, I wouldn't want to be super, what's the term? I wouldn't want to be super controlling about the composition.
You probably wouldn't want to make it so it's more optimal for you to like just both stick to the same strategy, right?
Absolutely.
Because if you go to one place and it gives you like the one tree progression, then like why would you want to split if you can do it together, right? Like and it would make it less varied, right?
Yeah, I'm actually not sure how I would protect against that. Like, it might feel a little bit lame for you to. Well, actually, one way that I would protect against that obviously is when you're in the starting zone, you would be able to enroll yourself into various like, churches or whatever, right? Like various sects of God's worship. And that would give you the opportunity to basically pick your class. Like, your worship is your class in this sense, right? And you could also cross class. Like, you imagine a paladin would be like the god of life mixed with the god of war or something, right? And so it's like you can heal and you can and protect and stuff from life. But maybe it would actually be the inverse, where god of war is your primary and life is your secondary, because you're a soldier and tank or whatever first and foremost. And meanwhile, the inverse would be like a cleric or some sort of battle healer.
Would you want it to be like formalized decision of what class do you choose, or would you want it to be free flow?
No, it would be like, because obviously that means you could mix like war and death to be a death knight or whatever, right? Like, death is not available in the starting zone most likely, but you can seek them out and stuff. The other thing too is that you can I did have the idea that you would be able to renounce one religion, at least maybe you'd be able to renounce your religion a certain amount of times, but like each time you do it, you have to progressively complete harder challenges to prove to whoever you're converting to that you really mean it, because obviously like the more you renounce it, it's like the sort of like, I don't know how to describe this in another way. Like one of the analogies that came to my mind is like if you got this guy and he's hitting on you and you're a woman and you're like, oh, he's interested in me. But then you find out he's slept with like 30 other women in the last week. And you're like, oh, okay, I see how this is. Like, you don't really mean all these things you're saying. You're just sweet talking me. Like the gods could probably interpret it somewhat similarly, where it's like, you've renounced your religion about 10 times recently.
I see the reason for the lower point. I just like, I usually hated about all the progression games where they have this thing where your decisions are essentially like in this case they're not permanent, but like you have to pre-decide things that you don't really know what the result of them will be, and then you have to pay the price to reset them. I don't know.
Well, it would be worked into the idea of the game, right? Because the trials are something you already complete. But then so the price that you're talking about paying in this case of renouncing say you renounce life and you want to go to death, right? Like that would be one obvious case. You actually don't need to do that for all of the cases because some gods are friendly with each other, right? Actually, life and death aren't really enemies either. Life is mostly against suffering more than death, because death is like necessary for life, right? So that's its own thing, right? Where we do a little bit more nuanced for our god relationships. But anyway, the life and death case is like, for whatever reason, say that's what you're doing as the easy example. If you were to do that, then you would have to, like, you would probably be put into a trial. But, say you completed 5 trials for life already. It's not like you start at level 1, the allegory of level 1 for death. You complete a trial that graduates you to level 5 in death. So you basically keep the progression level after doing that, whatever that paying that cost is, right? And it would be challenging as a result. Like it would increase in challenge depending on how deep you were in. That's like the natural way that you would probably protect against people like lazily switching between stuff over and over again or whatever to do certain things. Completing certain trials of certain levels as part of your renouncement. I think that's neat anyway. It's like a way to... it can be done well and elegantly instead of being what you're worried about, which I would also be worried about, by the way, is like, yeah, I'm just going to be stuck permanently making this decision. But the other thing that the game is about, of course, is it's going to be about like, what can a lot of choices, right? It's the choices that you're making, the choices that the world is making with all the nations and stuff doing stuff, all the independent actors, all the independent agents. But then also like compositions, if you're going to play with, party members or you're going to play with co-op or whatever, the idea would be like, it's a very ambitious title, like the very ambitious game. I have no idea. Like this would be a game where, and I haven't really thought this through either, but I was thinking like, if I was going to make an early access game, this might be it. And it would just be free until it was done. And that's how I would handle it. Because especially since I'm working on all this other stuff, like, okay, like if you guys want to encourage me to work on this more, then maybe I can. I mean, I still don't think this is a realistic and reasonable thing, but maybe then it's like, all right, let me set up a fucking crowdfunding for this.
To commit yourself to Unreal for so long,
right? Yeah. Well, I don't know if it would be an Unreal for lasting amounts of time. Ideally, it would actually.
We don't have a 3D engine yet, but
yeah. Ideally, it would be 3D, just because exploring the world and being able to change your camera and stuff is actually going to be a big part of like your way of examining what's happening and stuff. Yeah. And I don't know if I would have like hidden object shit where you can only find it when you've, changed your camera, but just being able to check, different angles out and stuff and like really soak in the architecture and being able to understand the different places and stuff is
really
cool.
Neat. So. I think it's great that you're exploring the 3D stuff because it's like, I've also like been wishing that I could do like, it would be neat to like already do a 3D game maybe because you could explore some of those things. Yeah. Although like it's not that I have a preference towards 3D or something. It's just like it's a different thing. You sort of like think of different solutions, different like it's just a different domain, right? Like it's very.
I think fundamentally, though, a lot of the level design would still end up being 2D because it's a turn-based strategy game anyway. So. It's not like in Apex X, for example, which is a Scatumasks project, which is actually 3D because you get to jump around the levels from you platform and anywhere you see you can path to somehow, most likely. So like navigation is not limited based on that. Whereas in a game that mostly behaves in a 2D sense, like to whatever degree CMBW is 3D because you get cliff advantage is probably the same degree that this game would be functionally 3D. But I think the environmental exploration aspect is a big deal and something that I would want to achieve.
Well, just the rendering being 3D is very different on its own because it's like completely different how it behaves. And Like you get the camera angle stuff, you just get actual depth, actual perspective and stuff. So it's visually very different, right?
And I'm really a big fan of the idea of like in a 3D sense with maybe an FPS game or something, actually being able to explore levels in that way more intimately as an agent within the world and, in a first person view or whatever. That seems really compelling to me as well. So also something that I want to check out at some point, right? Like we're one thing you guys can be sure of is that we will never run out of ideas at the No Frauds Club. It's not possible. We have too many ideas and they're all pretty epic. So buckle up. But,
yeah, it's like we play a game and we already have 10 game ideas out of time.
Right.
We just disagree with the original game because their execution is not great or.
Well, I look back at our what we were planning on doing with Risk of Rain 2, that we planned a mod and started working on it, and the mod was called Reconstituent. And I think the documentation is actually still online.
I was actually dig up recently on the server, and I said it's cancelled because we have more ambitious things to do, and people, for some reason, thought that was Giga Chad move. So.
Well, I think recently all the modding stuff broke, right? Like, again.
I don't know, maybe.
So, yeah.
I have no idea.
I haven't
It
really
probably breaks every time.
Yeah. But the like that was one of the reasons why we stopped working on it, by the way, is that like there was an update, it broke everything. We couldn't even compile it. We're like, okay, bye. Like we were already kind of on the way out anyway, because all of the stuff we wanted to do was super ambitious. But some of the stuff we were gonna do was like making it an actual game, like making the AI actually AI. Like that was one of the
API was not very friendly because it assumed you actually want to be like you don't want to modify the game, you just want to add content. Basically, and that you don't want to modify existing content too. So what you had to do is either repaste the fucking function and hook it with their like hooking stuff, or you actually had to do this like insane EL assembly stuff. Assembly as in C# assembly and not actual assembly. I don't know why that is a thing even, but yeah, it was really
not good.
Yeah, I don't know. I think the mechanical stuff that you mentioned, that there will be no RNG and no like number scaling essentially, is really good because like RNG we obviously I think we talked about on this podcast, right? Yeah, it's not good. But the scaling thing might not be as obvious why it's not good, but I would basically like the simplest explanation is that you can actually do the game design when you have constant numbers because you can decide stuff what the reactions will be, and they will be consistent and also learnable. And with ever-changing numbers, that's never true. Especially that usually the numbers are just blowed because you usually have similar levels, so it's usually not that important. The real progression is like in the skill tree and world exploration stuff, so...
Yeah, and the idea of that
happens too.
The idea of the... there was going to be equipment as well. I think the best and most promising part of the adversary, if we're going to call it that game, the game's planning for mechanics is just that it will be a counterpoint, something that exists in opposition to the idea that you have to have leveling systems and you have to have, number goes up and stuff like that. But there is a concern that maybe like the equivalent of higher level things would just be like, enemies which have more abilities than you or something, right? And that's where it could potentially get to a point where it's not winnable at all in such engagements if their abilities are just better. But I still think that we can balance that out based on compositions again. Oh, that was another thing I was thinking about is that based on the equipment.
In terms of the number scaling, I was actually talking with Elden Ring fan once. Used to be my friend. I don't really talk to him anymore.
Elden Ring makes you not a friend, bro.
Yeah,
you're out of here.
But he argued that I was basically criticizing the progression system in that game. I think it's really awful. It's not interesting. It's really just numbers go up and I get better abilities. And his argument for it was that he actually likes when you just get big numbers. That was the whole spiel.
Oh yeah, it's like a ceremony, right? It's like, look, you've gotten the ding. Like you get this really crazy party effect.
I much more prefer if it's a skill progression, like actual skill, like player skill.
Yes, yeah.
Not even abilities or whatever. It's just like you improved and now you can face tougher challenges.
I was actually thinking about in the combat there was this game we played called Stolen Realm, which is not very good and not complete. But in the game, we had this experience where like we could actually make our move at the same time. It's just like, so the teams, like it was a team turn. I guess it's like XCOM. I haven't played XCOM. It was like the team goes at the same time as opposed to individual agents. Like we actually don't know how we're going to solve for initiative, for example. Like I don't want it to just be a stat or whatever necessarily. However,
I would just.
go ahead.
I was thinking about that, and there are a few things that you can do. It's basically you can make it something that is not initiative, but I mean maybe you want it to be, but basically what I was thinking is that you either get like, so maybe you have a stat of number of turns you get or number of moves and attacks you get, maybe, and basically you exchange turns with the enemy. So like when it's your turn, you move all your units, and then the enemy turn he moves all his units, for example. Or you could do like, you can do interesting stuff where the player choice is the driver and not like some system where it just like predetermines the order.
I was actually hoping that maybe it could be done in such a way where it's sort of like a hybrid between real time and turn based, where the real time part is before you enter into combat, where you can position yourself. Like Divinity kind of has this, but basically you can get the jump on enemies, then that gives you the first play. And like really all we need to determine is who goes first, right? Like we don't really, especially if we do the team style. And if we do the team style, then it's pretty easy, as opposed to individual initiative. And then it's just like, okay, you go like your move order is determined. However, the other thing that I think is really important is I would like to explore free for all stuff as well, because like you're going to have multiple nations, and like maybe you hate all of them and you just want to, why are you guys fighting in this town I'm in? Just everybody gets to die now or whatever. Like if that's your approach, then you'd have multiple factions in one fight, more than just you and your enemy. So I think that would be neat too. Divinity also has this sometimes, and those are the more interesting fights, but oftentimes they resolve pretty sillily. But yeah, the gear stuff was going to give you bonuses and drawbacks associated with whatever that gear was, but your intrinsic characteristics would be based on your race and creature type. So say you're a wolf, you've got, high dexterity or whatever. I don't know what their stats are going to be called yet, but like, you move fast, you attack fast. Maybe you're, you've got a bite move and a paw swipe move or whatever. And the bite deals more damage or something.
Would you even want stats?
Yeah. Well, whatever your stats are determined based on what your creature type is. Right. And so like the damage that you deal, the HP you have or whatever, that's determined by that. So like every wolf is going to have the same stats in that sense, which actually allows you to, I mean, it sounds maybe boring to some people, but it actually allows you to learn what the like creature types actually are. The more you fight wolves, the more you understand like, okay, the basic wolf has like this much HP, and the, heavy wolf, dire wolf, whatever we call it, alpha wolf has like more HP than that and is more dangerous in this way or whatever. And like you kind of learn that. But then on top of that, you would have gear. So one of the ideas that I had actually, so for reasons we will explain in the game itself, actually wolves are a really bad example because there are no dogs in the whole game. But the idea of like a lion or something, like a cat-based thing, like a panther, one of the ideas, just to give you an idea of how crazy the game is going to be like you've got a lion, a basic lion that has basic gear, and then there's a lion that has a fucking mounted turret on it. Like, oh shit, well that guy's going to have a different attack, isn't he? And different stats too, probably. And so anyway, there's stuff like this, like armored lion versus regular lion. I don't know. So anyway, like we had ideas for that, and it would basically be like the gear is what determines. Sometimes gear will give you a new ability, like if you have a mounted turret, you can shoot, right? Obvious. Sometimes gear will have a drawback in addition to whatever bonuses it has. Maybe it makes you move slower, like it's a mounted turret and it's heavy. And then obviously, like you would have base stats for whatever creature you are. I don't know what your character creation would look like, but it would basically be you would pick between this prefab almost of like these are the stats I have, and these are the if I have like some racial ability.
Pick up some set traits basically,
right? And you can kind of think of stats as that, and then the gear modifies it, and you also have abilities which will give you conditional buffs and debuffs. And I say conditional because sometimes, obviously, they'd be like temporary. A lot of the times, like I don't think there's going to be anything permanent, like a passive that you get that passively gives you more movement or whatever. I don't think you're going to have anything like that, but just some of the ideas. So yeah, like that. Maybe answers your question about gear and also base stats.
Yeah. I don't know. I would just be like I obviously don't know the details yet, so it's kind of hard to
Oh yeah.
map everything. But it's like I would just be very wary about doing stats, especially if you call them something abstract like agility or whatever, because it's just usually very complicated and it's not for a good reason usually. So like I would try maybe like stats are just maybe place the stats on the abilities themselves, and maybe you like if you have a claw, maybe you have like some special like oh you have a claw attack that I don't know procs bleeding or something. And I don't know. I would probably try that, but I don't know the full vision. So
Well, I don't know how you would square that if your gear gives you your stats and abilities, which is one thing, like that's going to happen. Then, like, do you think of the wolf paw as a weapon or something as opposed to a part of the character? Like, you know what I mean? Because you can't equip the wolf paw yourself because it's a fucking wolf
oh,
paw.
so that would be just an attack, and then some gear would modify attacks, and some gear would add new attacks. I assume, maybe.
Yeah,
I don't know.
that
And
was
some
the.
would
Well,
have
I'm just
behaviors.
saying, like, if you can't really remove all stats because some creatures fundamentally exist differently, right? So you can't have like no intrinsic stats. That doesn't make any sense because otherwise you have to conceptualize, like even on a data level for the engine or whatever. You have to think of the like say again, you think about the
Yeah, I think it
lion.
would have stats, but they would basically be like directly like, oh, this is damage, this is the amount of moves, this is whatever. And it wouldn't be like abstract agility or something that you have to then
Oh,
learn
that's
and
what
it's
you're saying. I thought you
different.
were saying something different. Yeah, the I don't think you would have attributes, which is like the D&D term for agility,
Oh, I see.
dexterity. You would have like stats. When I think of stats, I think of like how much damage do you do? How much
Okay,
movement
yeah,
do you have?
that's better.
Yeah. So like everything, like the gear and your base traits give you the prefab, and then your gear modifies those, and then your abilities can also modify those. And both of the gear and abilities can be positive and negative depending on the situation.
Yeah,
So yeah, I think it'll be very clean. Like you won't have dexterity,
that's
which
really
gives
good.
you
Because
attack speed and movement speed or whatever. Yeah.
I was really wishing for a game like that with not none of that stupid shit.
Yeah. Well, you
It's
and me
just
both, homie. So
like I've been like I used to play like Heroes of Might and Magic, and it's just like everything is RNG, everything is like some sort of weird attribute and
yeah.
some sort of weird math. Everything is just junk, and like there's so much complexity to understand the game, but actual decisions that you take are not that interesting. So it's just like the complexity of the game is misplaced completely.
Yes. Yeah, that's a
So
good
the
way to
game is
sum it
just
up,
very
actually.
challenging.
Yeah. So hopefully we don't misplace it in this game. Of course, like I said, very slow going. You can almost think of this more as a concept, kind of like when we were talking about Onatar and how we were going to do the pretense system and the progression and shit. Yeah, very similar in that respect. We don't know when this thing will be operational. In fact, Veeq didn't even know about it until this podcast, so he learned along with you guys.
Yeah, I did know, but I didn't know as much.
Yeah, you knew some things about it. Yeah, you knew the gods. You knew my favorite god name.
Yeah.
So
I wish I could spell it from memory.
yeah, can you pronounce it from memory?
No.
Okay, well we'll leave. It's a very big cliffhanger. Comment below if you think you know the favorite god name. Most people won't even know any of the gods. That's okay. You guys can.
It sounds very Polish, if I remember correctly.
Crazy Mountain.
Oh, I should actually check it one sec.
No, and that's going to be the end of the podcast, guys. Hope you guys have enjoyed. I will say, unironically, one of the things I was thinking about, and again, we go back into the territory where we're thinking about stuff related to this crowdfunding thing. I was actually interested, mostly as like the people who are already on the coffee page. If you guys who are listening to this have thoughts on this, let me know, because I'm thinking maybe we create like a voice channel basically. And that's also where I can just do like, if I decide to do some sort of streams that are just for you guys, where I'm just doing development specifically on whatever you guys are talking about or whatever. And also like fielding questions live. And maybe V could do the same thing. That could be like your insider access or whatever, because you already kind of have that with the channel, and that's where people ask like questions. Like Miriam's been asking a lot of Zabalba questions about like what are the regencies like and what's going on there. And so maybe if I decide to like apropos of nothing do a Zabalba dev stream where I actually work on like the tech tree planning for one of the races or the art planning for one of the races or something, then maybe that could be the place to do it instead of it being like a public thing. If I want to keep some of that stuff more close to the chest, and then also act as yet another reward for people who are already supporting us. But the problem problem with every time I think about that is that it can also be interpreted as check out this extra incentive to start doing it if you aren't already. And I guess there's not really any escaping that, but I'm mostly thinking about I was thinking about that while I was working yesterday. I was like, it would be really cool if I actually did decide to do a Zabalba dev stream and worked on the Ansifi tech, and then Miriam could ask me questions because he likes the Ansifi or whatever. You know what I mean? Like shit like that could be neat. So
well, we talked at the last podcast that maybe we also include the long time contributors, basically, Kian is obviously now on the.
Oh yeah, he sent us some money recently, but even before that, he was just been around forever, right? So
yeah, so.
Or like Milestone, he's been around for a decent amount of time. He's not currently contributing money, right? So maybe we just what were we talking about including though? What was the context?
The voice genre for the coffee people.
No, I don't think so. I don't think I.
Oh, on the last one.
Yeah.
We were just talking about
giving them a game key.
About keys.
Yeah, we were giving them a game. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, that's probably true as well. Funnily enough, when Kian sent me money a long time ago, I think I forget how much money it was. Maybe $40 or something. It was nice gesture. He sent me money and he was like, "Consider this me pre-ordering Zabalba or something." I thought that was funny. I was like, "All right, man. I don't like pre-orders, but I appreciate your cash anyway. 3 me up, daddy." So yeah, there you go.
Yeah, pretty cool.
Pretty cool episode of Crow's Nest. What do you think? Is there anything else?
Yeah, I don't know. That's probably it. I guess I can briefly say that there's been I've been mentioning the Antikythera progress.
Oh right, yeah. You can take the opportunity now to say what you're going to be working on immediately after this episode is finished recording. Probably, wink, wink.
Maybe, yeah. So there's some pathfinding stuff. That was linked in the secret beta thing.
Oh yeah, for the JAI language.
Yeah. And someone linked some pathfinding stuff, and it was actually a bunch of articles, which some of them I just skimmed through, and some of them I actually took more time to read. And there are just some ideas. Some things just inspired me, some solutions that could improve the size-based collision stuff. Because currently some units will just not path very well according to size, and then there's following a unit, going towards a unit is somewhat buggy, which is experienced with resource harvesting currently. So that's something I want to patch up. And another thing is the Theta store thing, and it's basically currently we have this post-processing step, which basically smooths out paths, where it basically combines the. So you would have usually what A-Store gives you is it gives you segments of paths from tile to tile. It's on the grid, and basically the post-processing step is combining them into more smoother lines, the bigger ones between two tiles. And actually that algorithm describes a way of doing that, but not as a post-processing step, but actually as an A-Store step. Inside of the algorithm. So that's something I want to also try out. And yeah.
Well, there you go. And that means that you could do your post-processing after your pre-processing. You could have double the post-processing, right?
I'm not doing it. I guess. Well, I'm pre-processing collision stuff, I guess. But
yeah. Well, pre-processing, I just meant as part of the A-Star. I was just, they say about modern games, you just keep adding the post-processing layer until it looks, I can't say good without air quotes, but you know what I mean? Yeah, that's cool, though. I mean, just cleaning up some of those interactions will make workers with actual collision be a reality. We were thinking about that in our first game. It's still going to be early days for the idea of workers with collision in a game like this that's sort of like Brood War. And I was thinking it might result in the maps being bigger, the resources being more spread apart, and the worker counts in general being somewhat lower, which means the game state will be slower and the economy will be a bit slower. I think that could be an interesting way. You just sort of roll with the punches there, similar to the talk about, we would like it if we could have the same resource layouts as in Brood War, but the workers automatically figured out how to path around each other. It would be really nice if we could somehow change very little about the procedure. But in this case, let's just roll with it. Let's make something that actually functions, and let's see how we can iterate on that. And
I think reducing worker size is also helpful, right?
Yeah. Ideally, we wanted them to be bigger than they seem to have to be right now. But that's our actual worker, the dummy worker I made for you to be able to stream stuff is, I think, the size that you were telling me it should be. for the sake of like the optimizations.
Dummy
or whatever.
worker.
Dummy
Yeah.
worker, yeah, he's very dumb. He still sometimes decides he'll go on an adventure, but that's okay. We can make him stay put, and then he'll be good. So there you go. That's that. All right.
I think this is it.
That has been Crow's Nest episode 6, and we will be back with another episode, hopefully at a similar amount of regularity, because I think it's only been a week since the last episode. So
Yeah.
shocking. Check that out. Maybe we'll get a third one out before the end of the month. And to you, Raffle, I say you.